Greetings everybody, welcome to Macro Talk. It is Tuesday, October the 28th. Only 2-3 days left to go for the competition. You know that, right? It's product photography. It's going to take you 3 days to come up with a good photograph and get it made, but you have time. Friday night, midnight, it ends. Tonight we're talking about 26 terms that every macro photographer should know, and we're going to be going through them like fast. Now, I did this because I thought it would be a good idea for people who are relatively new to macro, so that they could get familiar with some of the terms, and then I added more and more stuff to each description until it became a challenge. And then last night I bit the end of my tongue and split it open completely, and I keep biting it when I talk, so if I scream during this, you'll know why. Saturday, after stack number 35, what's new in Photoshop? There's been some new stuff in the last month. We're going to talk about it. Bill and I, no, it's not going to be Bill and I, Bud and I. Everybody's Bill tonight for some reason. Sorry about that. I called David Bill. Yeah, I do that sometimes. Anyway, Saturday after stack number 35, 10 in the morning until 12:30 Central Time, or 11:30, something like that. Tuesday, Thursday, Macro Talk 2. I am organized. I have everything in notes and on paper, so I am organized. It's the fact that I got kicked off YouTube again because of this key thing that they have that's got me flustered. Thursday, Macro Talk 2, a macro trivia challenge. It's going to be a bunch of questions for you to answer. Keep your own score and let me know how you did. It's going to be fun. Informal competition. Let's see who wins. Okay, that's it. That's all I had as far. No, I had something about the competition. No, just to tell you that it's over on Friday night at midnight. Graham and I will begin judging it the next day, and we should have a video made and ready to release by Monday, I'm guessing. Okay, so macro photography, A to Z, 26 things that you should know, each of them starting with a different letter of the alphabet, as you would expect. A, aberration. Aberration, either chromatic or spherical. It's optical imperfections within a lens, typically, that cause either blur or color fringing or loss of contrast. They degrade the image. It's relevant because we tend to magnify these flaws when we're doing macro photography, because we're using wide open apertures, for example, to maximize light getting into the camera, and we introduce geometric aberrations when we do that, like barrel and pin cushion distortion, astigmatism, spherical aberration, coma, among others. So that's what an aberration is. Lower quality lenses tend to produce color fringing relatively routinely of different types. That's a result of different wavelengths of light focusing in front of or behind the focus plane of the sensor, and that results in fringing, color fringing. This is another type of aberration, and commonly seen with less well-corrected lenses. Seldom seen with apochromatic lenses like the Mitutoyo objectives I'm going to be talking about tonight several times. There's another kind of aberration, and that's lateral chromatic aberration. That's not where the wavelengths hit the sensor at the wrong orientation vertically, but where they do so sideways. The colors are split out sideways, and you end up with fringing at the edges of the image. Either way, they're fairly common with inexpensive lenses, less so with really good lenses, but you'll see it all the time, one way or another. B, bokeh. Did you know that's how it was pronounced? I'll explain why in just a second. Bokeh is a Japanese word. The Japanese word is bokeh, B-O-K-E. But in the 1990s, it was taken over by an American, I believe, a photographer who wanted to use the word to describe the out of focus areas in an image. so that he could refer to the quality of these out of focus areas. And he chose the word bokeh because that means out of focus in Japan. It means soft, believe it or not. And it is something that you have to see to understand. And I was desperately looking for pictures to show you this afternoon and couldn't find them. Had a small emergency. But anyway, colored areas, out of focus highlights, a form of longitudinal chromatic aberration is one of the ways that bokeh demonstrates itself. It's very common in reflective or shiny macro subjects, but it's really less of an issue, I think, for macro photographers than it is for, say, portrait photographers or street photographers, where the out of focus areas become very important. But it is a good way to evaluate an image beyond just the sharpness of the parts that are in focus. And I had to ask ChatGPT what the correct pronunciation was, because I hear everything from bouquet to bokeh to well, just about everything. It's B-O-W, bow, and then K is like kettle without the tul at the end. So it's bokeh. I think you can get away with bokeh, but that's what it's called, and it's from the Japanese. Which lenses have the nicest bokeh, do you think? In talking about macro lenses, probably the Voigtlander 125mm f2.5 APO Lansar macro is probably got the best bokeh of any lens that I know of. It's absolutely gorgeous, close to perfect. None of the distracting, jangly, sharp edges or donut shapes, stuff like that. It's very smooth, very pretty, and works beautifully. Runners up, my favorite lens, the Micro Nikkor f4 200mm lens. That's lovely. The Canon EF 180mm f3.5L macro USM. That's a runner-up as well. And probably the Leoa 100mm f2.8 APO is another really impressive lens. So if you like the idea of having bokeh in your pictures, get one of those lenses. Circle of confusion for C. It's the mathematical boundary between what is acceptably sharp and what is not in a photograph. It is the largest circle of blur that the human eye can perceive as a point of light in a photograph. That makes sense to you? Probably not. As the circle of confusion gets smaller and smaller, the depth of field gets larger as the amount of acceptably sharp stuff in your image increases. So in macro, the depth of field becomes very, very shallow as you go up on magnification, as you know, and it makes the circle of confusion something you just can't ignore. And it is probably the best explanation for why we need to use focus stacking to get an image that has acceptable focus all the way through the subject, because there's no other way for us to do it. The circle of confusion is just a way for us to put a number on how much focus we have in terms of depth. D, diffraction. Diffraction is something that happens when you're taking a picture with a lens that has a small aperture, or you have a microscope objective with a small aperture. It softens the image due to interference from light waves that are bouncing off the small aperture in the lens. It occurs earlier in macro than it does in any other kind of photography, because we use apertures that are significantly larger for several reasons. It's stopping down is what causes this loss of resolution. So if you're routinely taking pictures at f22 to try to get as much depth of field as you can, you are probably suffering from soft images because of the fact that you're shooting at such a closed down aperture. There isn't a hard and fast rule really, but the F number, which is the ratio of the lens's focal length to the diameter of the aperture, it doesn't actually have a dimension to it. It's just a number that describes that ratio. You should keep that around 20 or less. Once it gets above 20, you have really obvious softening from diffraction. And unless there's a desperately specific reason you need to shoot at a higher f number, you probably shouldn't. Most lenses, by the way, have a sweet spot somewhere around 1 or 2 stops more closed or slower than the fastest aperture. So if you have an f2.8 lens, then maybe it's 5.6 or even f8. That is the sweet spot. That is the absolute sharpest you're going to get, the best resolution you're going to get. And it's where you're right in the middle between diffraction on the closed down end and aberrations on the wide open end. It is the sweet spot of the lens. Every lens has one. Once you find it, if you want the best possible pictures, it's probably best to shoot at that aperture, which means you're often going to have to resort to focus stacking in order to get enough of your image in focus. And that's very important, because otherwise you're going to have diffraction softening and you'll just have to get used to it. But yeah, keep your apertures fairly open. Avoid closing them down to any double-digit numbers if you can. And yeah, find other ways to get the image in focus. We'll talk about them in a minute. E, extension. Whether that's tubes or bellows or special lenses that already have it built in. Increasing the lens to sensor distance. That is, from where you attach your lens to the camera to the sensor in the back, increases your magnification. As you stretch that distance out, your magnification goes up. And it also reduces the amount of light that gets to the sensor and the working distance on the subject end. In other words, the more space you have between lens and sensor, the less space you're going to have between lens and subject. Now, it is the foundation of reversing lenses and bellows rigs and many other close-up techniques. Adding extension is a very useful way to get magnification from a lens. But in doing so, you are moving the lens aperture further and further away from the camera, which means the camera is going to see it as a smaller and smaller hole as it disappears into the distance. That's called effective aperture, and effective aperture is actually what matters when we're talking about diffraction. So this goes back to number D and diffraction. If you are taking too much extension, if you're getting greedy about magnification and move your lens too far away, you're going to pay for it with diffraction. So you want to try to limit that as much as possible. There's a formula I don't have time to give you tonight, but rest assured that if you're pushing your lens beyond 3 to 1, say if it's a 1 to 1 lens, you're going to be very close to getting into trouble with diffraction. So let me see. I had something else in my notes. When you're trying to push a lens so far out to get the kind of magnification you want, that you are tickling with very, very high f numbers, it's usually best to stop and just switch to a lens that is made for high magnification, which is a microscope objective. You can push camera lenses and enlarger lenses way too far, and pay for it with the image degradation that you're going to get, where it's often a better idea to just switch lenses while you still can. Okay, I'm out of order. I've lost one of my pages. No, I forgot to turn it over. I double-sided printed my notes because there were so many of them. So that was extension. Excellent. And F, flat field lens, or flat field lenses. What is a flat field lens? It's a lens that's designed to produce a sharp image that is in focus across the entire frame. Think of the frame as a rectangle, because it is. And if you project an image onto that is not flat, that means that there is curvature in the parts that are in focus, and you can't put a curved image onto a flat sensor, it won't all be in focus. It will gradually go out of focus as you get to the edges. And that's what a flat field lens is. They're very common in enlarger lenses, and they're lenses that I absolutely love because of that. When you reverse them and extend them, they become wonderful high magnification macro lenses that still maintain that very flat field, so you can keep the whole image all the way to the edges in focus. And that's what a flat field lens is. They're absolutely essential when they're used as enlarger lenses or process lenses and plan apochromatic microscope objectives. But the most common ones are the enlarger lenses, and they're used for copying and photographing images or documents, coins, stamps, and precision macro. Shorter focal lengths can be reversed and will give you better images, sharper images, but that's not necessary as you get into the longer focal lengths, say above 50 or 75. Reversing them doesn't give you an advantage in magnification or image quality. The shorter the focal length, the more magnification. 50 is the sweet spot, but if you go down from that, if you go to 35, which you can, or even 24, you get much more magnification, but you also get much more aberration and a lot of weird geometric changes. I generally would say avoid reversing anything shorter than 24 millimeters. It's just not really worth it. G, glare control. Uncontrolled specular reflections is the bane of a macro photographer's existence. Harsh, bright spots where the light is directly reflecting off the subject straight into the lens. It's a major issue in macro, obviously, because subjects often have curved micro surfaces like eyeballs or elytra on beetles or pollen grains, chitin plates, seeds. Think of anything round and shiny, and the light source will bounce directly off the flat areas on those curved surfaces straight into the lens, and it makes these small, hot, harsh lights that are very, very difficult to control. The working distance is limited, and the light angles are usually varying a great deal as they bounce into the lens. And when you have all this glare, you can't see detail. It flushes out detail, just like having too much darkness or shadow in the picture. It washes out the structures on the surface, colors disappear when everything is white, and you can't read the texture. You don't know what you're looking at. But glare, like I'm talking about here, is controlled not by how much light you're putting onto the subject. And that's so important. It's controlled by how you're putting the light on the subject. In other words, turning down the power of your light, your flash power, does not remove glare. It just makes it a little bit duller, a little bit dimmer. Changing the angle or adding diffusion or doing both will affect glare. It will reduce it considerably. Finding angles that don't cause the glare by pulling your lights back a little bit, changing the angles and looking at the subject through the camera. That's how you can get control of glare. There are other more advanced strategies beyond diffusion and angle, and we're going to talk about them later. They include things like polarization, but using a big diffused light source so that your light becomes a wall of light instead of a point of light. And if you try to avoid coaxial light, that is light that is basically following the axis of the lens, that will reduce a lot of the specular highlights by moving your lights out to the side. I only had 2 minutes for that, so I've got to move on. Cross polarization I'm going to talk about a little bit later, and side or backlighting is actually a great way to shoot these kind of subjects to get great texture and surface detail. But if there's anything that I want you to take away from G, glare. If a subject looks shiny and flat, the solution is not cutting down the exposure, it's changing the shape of the light. H, helical focus shift, also known as focus breathing. When you turn the focus ring, the magnification and the field of view appear to change. Well, they do change. In stacking, this can cause misalignment of the images. If the subject is getting larger, especially if you have any variation in your distance, I mean your angle of shooting, if your perspective changes and there's a change in size, that can really cause problems for stacking programs. Now, Zarine can handle the size changes. What it has trouble with is handling changes in outline, and bad focus breathing can cause that, especially if you're not staying on axis. Macro photographers tend to move the camera or the subject rather than the focus ring. That is a true fact for some sizes of targets. For larger targets, for larger macro subjects, say things bigger than a peanut or thereabouts, it actually is advantageous to use the focus ring, but usually the breathing isn't going to have nearly as big an effect as it does with smaller subjects. So what we do generally is focus stacking, and that tends to overcome the problem. It's why we use things like telecentric lenses from time to time, and microscope objectives, of course, because a lot of the microscope objectives we use are almost telecentric. We'll be talking about that in a minute, but that's helical focus shift, focus breathing. Movie lenses don't focus breathe, which is super nice if you can afford one of those. ISO invariance. If you haven't heard about this, it's very, very interesting. Some sensors, especially those produced by Sony, can be brightened, the images they take can be brightened in post with no penalty in terms of noise. It's very weird, actually. ISO is a kind of signal amplification that allows you to pull detail out of underexposed areas, and it often leads to amplification of non-subject targets, like just the sensor thinks it sees something and it just makes noise there, and when you amplify the noise it gets worse. But that is what these ISO invariant sensors are able to do, is keep allow you to shoot underexposed, which I love to do anyway, and then pull the detail out of the shadows without making the noise worse. It's going to probably be the thing in all sensors eventually. ISO is probably going to become a non-issue, but it allows you to expose for the highlights and preserve delicate textures, and it encourages a kind of low ISO and then recover the shadows kind of workflow. But you have to shoot RAW. You can't do this any other way than shooting RAW. Not all cameras have it by any means, and it does take time to process the images. Cameras that have it, the Sony A7s have it, Fujifilm's X-T3 and a couple of the other X cameras have it, Nikon's Z cameras have it, all of them, I believe. Certainly the 7, 6, 8 and 9, yes, I think so, and the Canon R5, but most Canons don't. The Canon R5 is the first one to have it. You'll know that your camera has it if you have two native ISO settings on the camera, two low settings that you can switch between. It's a bit complicated. We'll talk about it later. J is jitter. That is motion blur to macro folks. Even the tiniest vibrations can ruin a macro image. It comes from shutter shock, from the mirror slapping around in there will do it, floor vibrations, your own heartbeat can do it if you're holding the camera. And the solutions for blur caused by vibration are to use very short duration flashes, which means low power. If you need more light and you're using low power to make faster exposures, then use more flashes. Use 2 or 3 flashes at low power. That gives you the shortest possible duration of flash and the least likelihood of picking up vibration while it's going on. Also, there are all kind of things, increasing the mass of your system, using remote triggering so you're not touching the platform or the camera. These are all important, and they all play together. There's no doubt that the more magnification you use, the more vibration becomes an issue. And when you're into microscopes at 100 magnification ratios of 100 to 1, you're going to run into vibration that you didn't know existed. So it's a constant battle for us. K, Kohler illumination. Now, we talk about this when we talk about microscopes almost exclusively. It's a structured method for producing even glare-free lighting in a microscope. And it adapts really well to macro photography. And in fact, the best way for me to describe Kohler illumination is to describe how I light my macro subjects, which is by Kohler illumination, and it's what I've been teaching on this channel for 7 years. It's where you use a primary layer of diffusion followed by a second layer of diffusion much closer to the subject, one close to the light source, one close to the subject. And really the whole idea, now of course if you're using Kohler illumination in a microscope, there is a lens between those 2 layers of diffusion. But the idea is that the first diffuser changes the apparent size of the light. By apparent, I mean what the subject would see if it wasn't a dead insect. It would see after the first flash, after the flash passed through the first diffuser, it would see a much bigger light source and no specific area where the light came from. The second kind of makes the light more uniform across the whole field. So with the first layer of diffusion, you obscure the light source, and with the second, you even the light out. So that by the time the light hits the subject, going through both layers of diffusion, it's so spread out that it's a very natural, soft, even look. And that's exactly what Kohler illumination is trying to do. It's about separating the light source from the subject, so that the subject isn't lit by a bulb or a flash. It's just lit by light coming from everywhere. And it's this glowing surface, I think, that most accurately defines Kohler. When you do that, and especially if you use, I use these tunnels I make of diffusion material, that means that the light that's hitting that has already been spread out, and it will just cover the subject with an even spread of light. Try it, you'll love it. L, long exposure drift. This is something that that we need to think about. You know, we're taking pictures using fast flashes, right? And on our macro rails, we're doing focus stacking, and the flashes are going off very, very fast, a short duration of flash. And then we see we've got weird duplication of structures and blurriness. What's it coming from? Well, it's coming from this long exposure drift, which is the thing that happens when you have an insect, say, that's on a pin, and over the course of your focus stack, because you've done it very slowly, you're using a DSLR, you're waiting 5 minutes between shots for everything to stop vibrating, and during that time the insect's legs and antennae are doing this, they're moving down, they're dropping, or your flower is wilting. That's what I mean by long exposure drift, and it will just ruin photographs. It's ruined so many of my photographs, even though I couldn't see the drift as it happened. You see it when you review the 500 photographs you just took. So it's very, there are many different ways of controlling it. It depends what the subject is. I will use things like glue, super glue on problematic legs to stick them in place. I'll also shoot the photograph sometimes with the insect upside down and then turn the photograph over so that I can have the legs locked in their extended position, so that when I turn it over, they're in the right shape. There's all kinds of ways you can do it. But you'll see it in biologic subjects like insects, where there's movement or contraction of the limbs. If they're alive, of course, they'll breathe and move and do all kinds of things. In plant material, they'll wilt, they'll dry, their leaves will fall off. Minerals and coins, sometimes they actually have temperature expansion when they're under lights, and some of them can even pick up vibrations from the environment. The lighting can cause the same kind of drift if you have LEDs that are flickering, or heat bloom from lights that change temperature, and diffusion shape change will do it too. If your diffuser changes shape or falls off, that'll do it. Supports and clamps can cause problems if they loosen up over time and cause a drift in the support mechanism. Anyway, tiny changes can lead to very big artifacts at 5 or 10 or 20x. Be aware of that. So the subject's changing over time is the problem. The longer your stack takes, the more artifacts will occur. One of the biggest bonuses of shooting continuous light, fast focus stacks using a rail with very short gaps between shots is you have very little to any of this kind of artifact. But I'm shooting stacks that used to take me 45 minutes in 5 minutes. So yeah, the longer they take, the more cause of halos and smears and doubling artifacts in your final image. So an efficient, decisive stacking workflow is probably your best bet to challenge that. M, magnification ratio. Magnification ratio is the image size on your sensor divided by the size of the subject in real life. So it's only affected by the optics of your lens. So it has, if you extend the lens or you reverse the lens, it's still lens related. But usually we just talk about it being a function of the lens. It is not, as many people are desperate to believe, it's not affected by the size of your sensor or the kind of sensor you have or the size of the screen on the back of your camera. The one-to-one that's printed on your lens is telling you what the maximum magnification ratio will be at the closest focus distance, 1-to-1. It will give you an image the same size as the subject on your sensor. Now, most sensors are considerably smaller than the screens on the back of the camera. So when they pump out the thumbnail for you to look at, they are going to enlarge that. Enlargement is not the same as magnification. So when you see the subject in the picture on the back of your camera and it looks bigger than it did in real life, that's because the image has been enlarged for you to see. But when you print the photograph, the image will be exactly the same size as the actual subject if it is shot at 1-to-1. So it is the lens, it is the lens optics that determine the magnification ratio. There are some lenses that offer a ratio of 2-to-1, and a couple of lenses that do so all the way up to 5-to-1. And yeah, that's pretty impressive. But it has nothing to do with the camera you're shooting with. Sensor size does change the field of view. When you switch from a full frame to a crop frame, you don't get as much of the surroundings on the frame, which makes any subject in the frame look bigger. Practice that. Take a photograph of your spouse or yourself in the living room, and then take a pair of scissors and cut out 2/3 of it, and you end up looking bigger in the last photograph, but you aren't, because it's the same picture. And that's exactly what happens when we get confused about using crop frame sensors in order to pull our subjects closer. We're just shooting less of the surroundings. Okay, fair enough. N, numeric aperture. Numeric aperture is a fundamental quantity that determines the resolution of a microscope objective. It's a dimensionless number. Don't you love dimensionless numbers? That's derived from the formula NA, numeric aperture, equals N times the sine of theta. Okay, well that's unhelpful. N is the refractive index of the medium that the objective is looking through, and the sine of theta is the sine of the half angle of the acceptance cone of light from that objective. An acceptance cone is how big a cone of light will be accepted into the objective, and the higher the numeric aperture, the larger that cone, which means the higher that numeric aperture gets, the higher the resolution of the lens. Also, the more light that can get in, the more difficult it is to control the risk of light that's getting in outside of the part of the lens that you need it to get in. You don't want off-axis light to come in, because that's what causes softening and loss of contrast. So higher NA lenses are most desirable because they are the ultimate in resolution, and they have the highest ability to collect light. So you have the sharpest images and the shallowest depths of field, I would add, and increased resolution of detail. But the higher the NA gets, the more careful you have to be about lighting. The lighting has to be, you have to eliminate off-axis light when you're using these kind of objectives. But that's what the numeric aperture is. Most lenses, most microscope objectives have much lower numeric apertures. Not, instead of 1.4 like you'd see with an oil immersion 100x objective, you may be looking at 0.14 for a 5x objective, even a good one. So higher NA, more resolution. O, optical axis. The optical axis is an imaginary line, well, I suppose it's not really imaginary, it's real enough, that goes from your sensor through the absolute center of your lens and out into the world. It's a very important line because the optical axis kind of defines whether or not you are aligned with your subject or not. And if you are focus stacking in particular, misalignment can cause all kinds of problems. It tilts the focus plane, for one thing, and it can cause sharpness to be uneven across the scene. If you think you're shooting at something dead on, when in fact you're slightly canted one way or the other, then it's going to change the actual angle of focus that's going through your subject, and that can lead to problems. It makes a strong case for having precision rig alignment when you set up your rig. People often ask me, why do I recommend that they get an optical breadboard to put their equipment on for focus stacking? Well, it's for this very reason. Is because those boards are made of aluminum and they're drilled out very precisely. And if you're careful and follow the steps accurately, you can set up your camera so that it remains, all of your equipment remains on the optical axis, and you don't have to worry about the camera being twisted one direction or the other. There are tricks to doing it. You can do it without an optical table. I don't have an optical table, though I certainly would love to get one day, but you can make a perfectly straight line without it. It's just much harder. But that's what the optical axis is. It doesn't take much of a shift to cause errors and stacking artifacts. In fact, you can actually, with the movement of the optical axis, with you not knowing it, you can actually change the outline of the subject you're focus stacking, and that can really be the kiss of death in focus stacking. So optical alignment needs to be in both the up and down as well as the left and right axis. See what I'm saying? The axis is down the middle of the lens. I don't have a lens to show you, but you have to have that that lens straight from side to side as well as up and down. Either one of them will cause problems. P, polarization and cross-polarized lighting. Unpolarized light vibrates in all kinds of directions. That's what sunlight does, and LEDs and most flash. It's just it goes all over the place, the axes of vibration. Polarized light only vibrates in one axis, one orientation. When light hits a subject, for example, the angle that it hits the light at is the same as the angle that it reflects the light off relative to a plane down the middle. So we know enough now from those two facts to handle some of the worst problems that we have in macro is unwanted bright reflections, specular highlights. And there is one special angle at which most of the reflected light becomes fully polarized. Did you know that? It's called Brewster's angle, which sounds like a character from a comedy film, but no, Brewster's angle. When we light macro subjects, especially insects or seeds or shells, minerals, wet surfaces, anything shiny, we get these white glary spots because the surface reflects the light directly back at us, and that reflection is polarized, meaning that the light's just vibrating in one direction. But what if we were to polarize the light that we're putting on the subject and rotate it through 90 degrees? We would essentially be able to block all of that glare from the subject while not messing with the surface color and texture. Is that a fact? Absolutely. That's what we do. It's called cross-polarization. Polarizers don't darken a subject. They darken the reflections from the subject, and they do so by eliminating light that is coming off the subject polarized into your camera. Now you can polarize the light coming into the camera, or you can polarize the light hitting the subject and the light coming into the camera, and they have different effects, much greater with the cross polarization, but it is a very sophisticated and effective way to reduce glare in your macro photographs. I think we just might make it. I think so. Q, quality of light as distinct from quantity of light. The qualities of light that we describe are really describing how light interacts with our subject, and it's how it demonstrates textures and colors to us, and it's a result of light being either soft or hard, meaning a large light source or a small light source, a source that has been diffused, and one that is left very directional, a broad or narrow light source. These are all qualities of the light that, as the quality changes, the interaction with the subject changes, and it's basically how we use light as an artistic tool in taking photographs. It is the key to macro photography that is expressive. When the kind of pictures that we look at that win these competitions that we do every month, the ones that win do so because the lighting in them is expressive, because they are using light to tell us something about the subject. And it's hard to describe in 2 minutes or less, but adjusting the quality of the light with modifiers like diffusers or grids or snoots or flags or reflectors, anything you can think of that changes the quality of the light hitting the subject, is how we craft photographs instead of snapshots. And yeah, it's in product photography, this is incredibly important, using non-directional lights that you then diffuse through, either bouncing them off the ceiling or using a large sheet of diffusion paper. The goal to be that you're using lights that have no apparent direction. They're infinitely large. They're creating a wall of light. That is a maximum change in light quality that it would be very easy to see if you tried using that bare studio flash bulb without a diffuser. You'd immediately see what the quality issue is. R. Did I do Q? Yes. R. Reciprocity of motion. That's actually a term that that somebody made up. It's a way for us to remember and recognize that motion in photography is not just the subject moving by. It's also the camera and the environment. So the camera, the environment, and the subject, all three have to be solved. The problem of motion has to be solved for each, for us to successfully photograph a subject when something is in motion. And macro, more than anything else, I think, involves solving for these three potential sources of movement and not just changing up shutter speed. So camera vibration, tripod wobble, or drooping flowers, stiffening insect legs, spiders deflating. Spiders have a way their abdomens will leak out while you're photographing them. Disgusting. The rumble of an air conditioner downstairs, or the induction motor that starts up in the fridge. You know, the thing that vibrates mightily for a few seconds while it's getting going. Bouncy floors, hardwood floors that aren't particularly hard. We have to address every one of them. If you're taking macro pictures and your pictures are soft, or have another unexplained issue with sharpness and resolution, you need to think about motion, because it's going to be part of the problem usually, and you need to look diligently for the sources. It has taken me years sometimes to find a particularly obscure source that was causing. I had one time when it was an air conditioner at a house 2 doors down from me. It was on a concrete slab that had eroded underneath, and when the air conditioner started, this big slab wobbled, and it caused wobble in my camera when I was focus stacking. Yeah, what did I do about it? Not going to tell you. Yeah, that's important. S, subject stabilization. Sometimes the subject and not the camera or the environment is what needs to be controlled. And while I don't approve of this technique, cooling will sometimes allow you to stabilize your subject, but as will for a dead subject, posing or bracing or using anti-static technique. All of these things we've talked about, blocking airflow, using a little drop of super glue, provided the insect is dead, obviously. Just make sure that if you are going to control the movement of a living subject, whether it's a maggot or a llama, it has to be humane and responsible when you do it. We don't photograph live subjects unless we are treating them humanely and responsibly, please. T, telecentricity. Telecentricity is an optical design where magnification doesn't change as the distance from the lens to the subject does change. That's weird, you think. Right, well it is. Perspective doesn't vary, so the edges don't bulge or shrink. The subject stays the same size. This is why Mitutoyo long working distance apochromatic lenses are so appreciated by macro photographers. Well, part of it is because they're apochromatic, and therefore they are so well corrected that you don't get chromatic aberrations to speak of. But they're also almost telecentric. If you look at them, they have a very large front element, and you're photographing things that are a little bit smaller than that. So you actually have a telecentric lens in your possession when you're shooting some of these long working distance objectives, and it totally eliminates the issue of focus breathing when we switch. This is one of the reasons why when you get beyond about 3.5x, I say go get a 5x camera objective, get a Mitutoyo if you can, and that will be your next step up from the 3.5. So telecentric lenses keep the magnification constant, and it really is the secret to super clean, artifact-free stacking, that is to use these lenses. They're just fantastic. Ultraviolet light photography, but in particular UV IVF, which is UV-induced visible fluorescence. This is when you shine UV light on a subject, the subject's tissues soak up the energy and then release photons at different energies, which looks like color to us. So when you shine UV light onto a thing, it glows with other colors. That's UV IVF, and it's a great fun thing to do. If you've ever photographed fluorescent rocks, for example, there'll be a bland looking piece of rock, and then you shine the light on it, and my goodness, it's blue and red and glowing brightly. That's what you're photographing with UV IVF. Many biologic subjects will fluoresce. Scorpions do. I discovered a cactus that did. It was the cactus that my son gave me for Christmas a few years ago, and it does fluoresce right before it dies from being shined on with UV light. So if you have a cactus, it's called a Christmas cactus, don't shine UV light on it. It will glow and then drop dead. It'll reveal structures and pigments that are usually invisible to the naked eye, which is pretty cool. So you can see stuff that other people can't, and it's fun. And the things that absorb the energy, by the way, are called fluorophores, and they are actually elements within the cells. And those fluorophores are chemicals that react to the UV energy by releasing their energy at a different wavelength. Very, very cool. I have a video on UV IVF that I never did release. I just found it the other day, and I think I probably will. That's good. Remember one thing, by the way. Big, powerful flashes produce a lot of UV. So does the sun. You know the sun does because you get sunburn when you go out in it. But if you don't think about it, bright flashes going off over and over again will damage your retinas. So be careful if you're using flashes that have had any tinkering done on them, if their UV filters have been removed, for example, as some people do for some reasons. And by the way, I'm not going to talk about ultraviolet photography, which is where you actually use a special modified camera to photograph ultraviolet radiation that's being emitted by a subject. But if you ever want to look at that, it's pretty horrible. It makes people look like they're ghostly. Yeah, not crazy about it. Vibration isolation. I've said a lot about this tonight. Stability is more than just, hey, get a tripod. Way more than that. You have to think about the mass of your rig, how you damping vibrations with materials that go underneath your rig, how you decouple from floor vibrations, what you bolt your rig to. All of these things, including the use of flash to freeze motion. Micro sharpness, or macro sharpness, I guess you could say, is won and lost in what you do about vibrations. If you learn nothing else from V, learn that. W, working distance. That's the space between the front of your lens and the subject. It really isn't. Working distance is defined in textbooks as being between the sensor and the subject, and you just have to subtract out the length of the camera, but we typically refer to it as the end of the lens to the subject, and it determines exactly how you're able to light things. The shorter your working distance, the 100x Mitutoyo objective has a working distance of 6 millimeters. That's not much. 6 millimeters is not a lot of room to get light in, but you can do it if you're using the right kinds of light. So feasibility, comfort, and of course stressing the subject if you're silly enough to try to photograph a living thing at 100x. But yeah, it's one of the most important things you need to think about for a particular shot is how much working distance is this lens going to give me. And remember that as you get beyond with a camera lens, as you get further back than the minimum focus distance, your magnification will drop off. So you need to bear that in mind as well. You can get more light in, but you're also twice as far away, so you're going to get less light in the camera. All right, X, xenon flash duration. So flash duration, not shutter speed, is what freezes motion in macro. Short duration pops of low power light prevent blur of subjects that are vibrating or moving to some extent. You get razor sharp images in living images. You get razor sharp images of living insects is what I meant to say when you're using minimum power, maximum speed lights. Speed lights better than most studio lights. Studio lights don't have the same circuitry. They use a special gated transistor in the speed lights that allow you to get very, very fast flashes, very fast duration, down to 1/80,000th of a second or something like that, which is way faster than your camera can do the shutter. So if you want to stop blur, do that. Why? Your alignment error. Small angular misalignments in your setup from a screw that you put in the wrong place or something you didn't tighten down can ruin your stacks. It really can, and it can create artifact where you don't need it. If you are going to understand accuracy and stacking, you need to understand your pitch. What's the other one? Oh, tilt. Not called tilt though, is it? Yeah, it is. So you need to understand how each of those motions on your rig, if your camera is or it's tilted, then you're out of alignment. So understanding that, knowing how to measure for it with a protractor or something, very key. Take your time to visualize the geometry of your rig, and you'll keep out of trouble. I've got 2 minutes left, and I've had enough time to talk about each of these letters for 2 minutes, and I've only got one left. Z. You think I'm going to say Zerine, don't you? Z stacking workflow, because we need to be inclusive. Z stacking workflow is of course focus stacking. It is the controlled capture of multiple photographs as the plane of focus moves through the subject, as we move the camera and lens forward, usually. Not always, but usually. To do it well, you have to figure out the correct step size, you have to have a stable subject, you have to have the right depth of field figured out for the optics that you're using, your lighting and your processing need to be good. And it is that workflow that ends up with some of the most remarkable photographs. And this really is the signature technique of macro photography. Z stacking, as it used to be called, focus stacking as it's called now, is really the heart and soul. You can't be an accomplished macro photographer unless you know exactly how to do good focus stacking. And that was the 26th term. That was pretty good, I think. A whole alphabet. And did you disagree with any of them? If you did, keep it to yourself. No, seriously. If you thought there was a better letter, if you were waiting for me to come up with something different for D, then let me know what it was that I should have said, because I thought these were pretty good. I actually came up with 90% of these by myself. I had to fill in some blanks with the help of the computer. Who was here today? Joseph was here. David was here. Is here. IGBT. That's lots of studio lights are IGBT these days, says Joseph. I only thought that real expensive Pro Photos and those ones from Nashville, Tennessee, the ones I use. Paul Buff, I know they are. Take care, Art. See you on Thursday. Klaus, good night. And everybody, if I didn't say hi to you, it's because I didn't see you were there. Julie's there. Hi. And let me see. Everybody has adopted the code name Joseph. Right. Well, it was a small crowd today, it looks like, but thank you everybody for coming. And let me see if I've missed anybody. Amy is here. Greetings, Amy. And Robert is here. Fantastic. Robert, I hope you got your package. It was mailed out the other evening. And yeah, if I missed you, I'm sorry. But it is after 9 and time for my bed. I wish. All right, guys, I'll see you on Thursday. If not Thursday, hopefully Saturday. And we'll have some fun with the trivia quiz on Thursday.